E-commerce expansion myths blasted. Successful cross-border expansion help. Listen to the show to hear how one UK company is helping e-commerce sellers successfully expand into Europe and double their profits. Hosted by Andy Hooper of Global E-commerce Experts.
Welcome all to another Global E-commerce Experts podcast. Welcome this session by Paul O'Connor, who's head of services at Optiseller, one of eBay's leading partners for data optimization. Welcome, Paul. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's get straight in. Could you tell me a bit about your experience? What got you into Optiseller? How did you arrive where you are now?
Yeah, so a little bit of a dotted history of myself. I've been in sales and account management for 20 plus years, and back in 2008 I was working for Vodafone in Ireland, and a headhunter came and knocked on the door and was quite interested in sort of getting me on board for what was a clandestine project back then, and it turned out to be eBay. So if we take our minds back to eBay in 2008, we're very much a C2C platform, so I would buy from you and vice versa. And I suppose the B2C side of the platform hadn't really evolved, and they were looking to try and bring retailers and brands onto the platform to heighten the consumer experience, to sort of compete with Amazon, which at that stage was starting to take a little bit of traction, and to try and kick on in terms of their product offering and drive additional revenue for eBay in a new way.
I like the word clandestine. That's probably the best way of using. That's probably the best way of explaining you've got a job short of being a spy.
Yeah, I try to pick myself up whenever I can. So clandestine's a big word, so it works.
Yeah, it does very much so. Yeah. So in terms of sellers who are using the eBay platform in its more modern guise, what's the three-step approach when it comes to optimizing data?
So I think if you're looking at it from an existing merchant, there's two ways of looking at it: from a new merchant who's coming onto the platform, and then an existing merchant. They're both similar, but you have to look at them in a different way. So if you're a new merchant coming onto the platform, you have to ensure that you have the right rich content in the first place. So that's one element of it. You have to ensure that you're in the right category, because that's fundamentally important in terms of conversion, because you could be listing in a completely different category than you should be listing in. Therefore, you get lower conversion, lower eyeballs, lower revenue, lower feedback, so you don't build up that incremental history in terms of feedback and an ongoing sort of uplift in terms of impressions for eBay, which is fundamental to the algorithm. So you have to look at it that way. And I think if you're looking at the categorization, then you have to ensure that the aspects are correct for the product attributes, fundamentally. So that's really, really important, because eBay puts a huge value on those across the board. So if we break that down into 4 different key criteria, they break it down as required soon, recommended, and additional. And essentially, you're meant to have coverage across all 4 of those. If you're missing large portions of that, you're going to miss out on gaps in terms of data, because you're going to get filtered out of search. So we have to ensure that that's fully in place across the board. And then once that's in place, we then have to look at compliance of that in terms of, do you have the correct number of images? Do you have optimized titles up to 80 characters? Do you have duplicate listings? You have to really work on those in terms of ensuring that you're compliant on the platform and that you have rich content that's going to convert at a higher rate than the competitor. It's really
so
important.
As much about what you're not doing as well as what you are doing.
Correct. Yeah. And I think the interesting bit as well is there's always now keeping up with the Joneses from the eBay perspective. You're always looking at your competitors to try and see what they're doing, whether it's a sort of what we refer to as a technical and a tactical. The technical is obviously around the data optimization, but are they offering free shipping where you're not offering free shipping? Are they doing bundle purchases? Are they doing retail promotions? Are they doing coupons? Are they doing buy 2 products, get 10% off? So you really have to work on ways to try and give a better retail standard across the board, because eBay does put a huge level of credence on that currently, because that's obviously the evolution of modern shopping, as we all well know.
And is that the analysis of the competitors? That's not data that's analysed by Optiseller. That still needs to be done by the seller.
Well, interestingly, the seller can do it on a line-by-line item, so they can look at eBay, log into a competitor listing, see the number of images they have in terms of eyeballs, look at the sort of the titles to see what they look like, very specifically look at the HTML descriptions, or indeed look at the item specifics that are under the border on the description, and they can sort of get a good guesstimate as to whether something is working or not working. but we actually can put a competitor dashboard report together for merchants based on snapshot information. Should a merchant come to us and look for it, but we're very much focused on supporting the individual merchant on what they can do. So we sort of diagnose, identify, and then sort of enrich and provide data around that. So we're very focused across those three key areas of supporting a merchant on the platform. I think it's really interesting as well that for merchants that are coming on board for the first time, if they get it done once correctly and right, put the time and effort into it, they generally don't have to go over unless they have multiple duns of product a year. So if you're doing eBay correctly in the first instance, you can actually save yourself a lot of time and effort if it's done properly in the first place.
In terms of the replication on the next set of listings.
Correct. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. And so, use it as the insider, knowing what this information looks like, this data looks like from a seller's perspective.
Yeah.
What are the general rules that you think sellers should follow to put their products in front of buyers?
I think for eBay, it's very simple, and to be honest with you, it hasn't overly changed in sort of the 14 years or so that I've been involved with eBay business, sort of directly and indirectly. It's very much having a fully optimized title, making sure that your keywords are rich and that they form product attributes. That if you're looking at the item specifics, that you very much have your required and required soon covered off. Less so the additional ones, which could be arbitrary, obscure item specifics that are very broad for eBay, but having the sort of what buyers are going to search for. And I think fundamentally as well, if you're thinking about, I think merchants sometimes go onto the platform thinking that they know the information that they need, but eBay works very differently, as does other platforms. There's nuances across them all. But I mean, if we were to look at eBay as an example, I mean, if I was listing a gym bag, I could also list, put it as a sports bag or a hold all. So, but if you're putting those keywords into your title or into your item specifics, you have a better chance of surfacing in search, you have a better chance of conversion. It's how do you get your eyeballs directly to your listing? Very similar to Google SEO to a certain extent.
And that's
so you're really focused on that.
Filters, yeah.
Correct, yeah.
And so for a seller who's not currently on eBay, I mean, eBay's evolved hugely in the last 5 years or so. And is now far more attractive to online marketplace sellers who previously hadn't been using eBay. In terms of the optimization for a seller that might have been selling on, say, Amazon, and they're now perhaps curious about a multi-marketplace approach, which is always something that Global E-commerce Experts promotes.
As do we.
How much do things change? I mean, how does the optimization change between marketplaces when that they're already used to?
Yes, so I think it's interesting because the taxonomy changes for all of the marketplaces. So if you're looking at Amazon, you're looking at sort of A+ content, and you're to a certain extent you're looking at rich content, title, multiple images, reviews, trying to get the buy box to a certain extent. With eBay, it's not dissimilar. Just the algo works in a different way. So for new merchants coming on board, it's all the fundamentals, as we've just said, ensuring that you're in the right category. And an example that we could use is a chisel, which is a fairly nondescript product. For eBay, you could list that into DIY sort of hand tools, chisels, and you would think that that's absolutely the correct category to list in. It's not. The highest converting category is business, office, and industrial, chisels and hand gouges. So again, it's becoming very specific. So that's where I suppose we show our value in being very specific, working with merchants, whether that's new merchants or up to new merchants to the platform or existing merchants, to give them the very specific information based on our insight and analytics around the sort of the platform as to where they should be putting their listings, where they have the higher propensity to convert, where they're going to get the most value in the long term. And I think the interesting bit as well, what we try and do is we try and provide primary categories and secondary categories to give them an overall uplift across the board. So there are nuances across the board, but I think, the data stands for itself. And the interesting bit that I would say as well from eBay probably holds merchants to the highest level of data across the board in terms of you don't need that sort of the level of details is required for eBay as you would for an Amazon for a certain extent. But having that data available to yourself is actually good because it's the fundamental platform for you to build your multi-channel approach on. And so therefore you can go to a mano platform and have the same level of detail, or an on-buy for that matter. And you can actually put in the product attributes, whether it's blade length for a chisel or handle type or grip or pack size, width, dimensions, weights, whatever it might be. and that you may not necessarily be asked for from an Amazon perspective, but you may other if you want to go on the B&Q marketplace or whatever that might be. So it's setting yourself up for success, having the raw data available so that you can then supplement and implement that into other platforms as you want.
We've had a huge amount of interest on the B&Q platforms,
Yeah.
so that's come around. So I'm sure that's going to be pretty cool.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that we talk about things like the chisels, for instance, and the different categories. That's the kind of thing that you can't guess or even learn from experience. You either associate yourself with someone who has churned the data and can prove it from the data, or you don't know it ever. It's not something you can guess, is it? It's
no,
it
absolutely.
only comes from churning the data.
And I think that in terms of churning the data, if you're looking at a sort of a marketplace manager and their time, they're obviously tasked with sort of implementing their store onto a platform within a specific time frame. So they might have either the resource or time to go and actually manually review this information, but it's critical to success. So I think what we're finding is a lot of merchants are actually coming to us looking to outsource their data optimization, given as we're a specialist team that do that. This is our bread and butter, to ensure that they're set up for success as best they can be, because they just don't have the time to waste. And as I said, the data from an eBay perspective is fundamentally stronger than any other marketplace that I've seen, and so therefore you can sort of take pieces of that and put it into other marketplaces as and when you want to scale out. Which as you said, very at the top of the call, was marketplace growth and multi-channel approach is fundamental to anybody's sort of e-commerce strategy. So it's having the building blocks.
And when at the other end of that strategy is spending good money on PPC and optimization on the front end to gain traffic, being able to optimize it on the other side, it feels like you're only doing half the job if you don't do it.
But it's interesting as well from the eBay perspective. You have lots of merchants just going straight into promoted listings and that sort of PPC element of it. But if you're missing large swathes of your data from sort of technical perspective, once you turn off that promoted listings, you might see that it's not going to kick on in terms of revenue as much as you thought it would do, because you've actually left so much money on the table by not optimizing your data. So it's a fine balance for both. And we promote both from an eBay perspective, but we obviously err on the side of caution in terms of data optimization, because that's imperative. If you don't have the right data, you don't have the right foundation, then you're trying to put sort of PPC and SEO on top of it. It can cause us challenges in the longer term.
We talked a little bit about how much eBay in particular had changed in the last 5-ish years. What advice would you have to sellers on how they keep up with the change in consumer behaviors and the changing ways that consumers are shopping?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point. So I think from my side of it, I can see social shopping is very much taken a huge part of people's consideration. So they mightn't have the time to very specifically go and look on like an Amazon or an eBay, but they might be on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok. So that sort of product shopping, direct product shopping, is definitely going to, over the next number of years, become even more prevalent, I think, especially as machine learning and AI get stronger from the large platforms, that they're going to know more about us and what we want before we even know it. So that's something to be really mindful of. I think as well that this, one of the things that I've been thinking through in terms of trends is obviously we're going through a cost of living crisis at the moment. Obviously Liz Truss today has become Prime Minister of the UK, and everybody's waiting and wondering to see how that's going to happen, before the rest of the year. But the impact to shopping, supply chain, so truck driving, deliveries, all of those things. Are people going to shop earlier before Christmas to try and get their goods? Is click and collect going to pick up a little bit more? I think they're the bits of the things that we're trying to think through as a company, as people try and reduce their travel, obviously increase their online shopping, but how do they marry both of them together? And what retailers I think are going to come to the fore over the next couple of months in advance of that, because obviously people aren't going to have the same access to product as they thought that they might have. I don't think. I don't know what your thoughts are.
And perhaps squeezed from, certainly in the United Kingdom, squeezed from a finance perspective with from costs increasing. So that certainly does change the behavior of how people might go about finding deals, for instance.
Yeah, I think there's a short term. Yeah, sorry to come across. I think there's a short term piece where we're trying to. I think you're trying to figure that out. I think we're trying to figure that out. I think most sort of e-commerce managers and marketing directors are trying to figure that out. But I think in the longer term, there's going to be a sort of a more sustainable piece in circular economy. I think, even if you look at Pretty Little Thing, the last couple of days announced their sort of their resale platform to help with sort of fast fashion or reduce the impact of fast fashion. You're definitely going to see that. You've seen it with eBay and their pre-loved marketing activity around Love Island in recent weeks and months. So there's a shift towards that. I think people are going to be looking for more sustainable ways to purchase and acquire, particularly fashion products. I think there might be an element of regifting around that as well to a certain extent, which is obviously going to push more people onto marketplaces. And I also think as well, people are going to be more conscious around shipping and sustainability around shipping, which is something that we have to think through as well. So there are a couple of trends that I think will be quite prevalent.
As a former clandestine, now fast-tracked expert in optimization, what do sellers get wrong? What are the common mistakes that are made?
Yeah, I think they're trying to generally merchants are trying to fit their data to suit themselves as opposed to trying to suit the platform. So if we're taking that, just some of the examples that we just talked through from an eBay perspective is they might have all the relevant data available, say for chisel or sort of a hammer or a hand tool, or even it could be a P&A fitment product to a certain extent, and that all the available information is there. It's on a description template, but they haven't taken the time to actually put that into eBay's values, which are the item specifics or product attributes. You can see it actually when you look at the title. You can scroll on the page, you can see the images, you can see their retail offering, and then below the fold you can see all of the 12 to 14 product descriptions, but none of them are implemented from an item specifics, which is eBay's main part of their algorithm, along with title. So from us, that's one of the big elements that we see, as being vastly incorrect. And I think, as I said, as well as the categorization is not where it needs to be for certain products, or at least they've put them into primary categories and not spent the time to research if they should go into secondary categories. And I think that's the big area that we see a lot of big missing gaps. And to be frank, we see it across major retailers, large existing providers that might have only 30-40% coverage across their item specifics, which obviously that's a big gap of data that's missing, and that's obviously money on the table.
And let's talk a little bit about predictions. We mark the date of today's podcast recording with the news that Liz Truss has just been chosen as our next Prime Minister. What are your predictions for retail in the next few years? What kind of things do you think are going to happen?
I think it's going to be an interesting time. I think with Brexit, I think there's going to be a number of challenges from a UK perspective. I think there's going to be, from a marketplace perspective, there's fundamentally going to be more of a shift to focus marketplaces. So as you can see, the likes of B&Q, as we just mentioned, becoming the B&Q marketplace, Mano Mano being very specifically a home and garden DIY and home improvement site, and that's been buyers are gravitating towards because it's a shopping experience where they know that they're going to go directly to there, and they're going to have less noise in terms of being proactively targeted on other products that they might have in their cookies. So I think people are going to get I think that's going to be more of a focus in the coming years. As I mentioned, I think this sort of sustainability is going to be a huge element, especially as we look at sort of increased energy costs, fuel consumption, electricity. Nobody knows what's around the corner, but I think fundamentally they're going to be the main areas for growth. I think Click and Collect, from my perspective as well, it's sort of had a great jump start over the sort of the first couple of years when it came out, and sort of for certain retailers it adds a huge amount of benefit because they're at significant scale. For others, less so, but I think that's probably going to become more prevalent and more focused in the next sort of 24 months or so, as people are looking to manage their time better, manage their costs better, and prioritize both as best they can, especially for families that are sort of in that squeeze middle a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, Paul, thanks very much for giving us your insight. I mean, having spent some time talking to you guys on the team there and learning about Optiseller, it's an incredibly powerful bit of kit to give you insight into what you can do to optimize your data and to need to do that. Is there anything that you guys offer for sellers that can want to try out your services but not ready to sign up to a subscription?
Yeah, absolutely. We've just announced our taster plan, which is basically an opportunity for merchants to dip their toe in the water and give it a try. We have, it's basically just a couple of tools within that, a category lookup tool, which again sort of takes the pain out of trying to understand what category you should be listing in. We actually provide that tool for you free of charge, a suggester, and as well as a category suggester and a product suggester as well, to understand how you can position your listings and try and compete as best you can in the platform. So there is a free tool there currently available for subscribers to log on, get access to the tool, and try and understand eBay a little bit. And our team are always on hand to sort of lend any support to our customer success team where possible to help you on your journey. That goes without saying.
Fantastic. I mean, there's so many e-commerce sellers are exposed to so many different tools and bits and pieces they're subscribed to, which all have a benefit in from some perspective, I'm sure. But no doubt, there's always a pressure of what's eroding away at the margin from both sides. So it's always good to get the insight into the ones that really make a big difference. And for Optiseller, what's next? What's on the horizon?
So I think we're very clear in our strategy as a company. We've had sort of explosive growth over the last sort of 24 months. Obviously, COVID's had a huge part in that. Obviously, with people transitioning to online, thankfully, we've come out post-COVID and things are a little bit more normalized. But we've seen major growth in Germany in the recent sort of 24 months or so. We've had a new team in Australia as well, headed up by Jit Gondali, who's obviously ex-eBay as well. And we're really focused on supporting the platform directly there and our partners in country. And I think, for us, we've got a large portion of our merchants are based in the US as well. So we're looking to try and get deeper into the US market with, Craig McCallum, our CEO, heading to eBay Open in New York this month. I'm heading to eBay UK in the UK. So, and my colleague Stuart is heading to eBay Germany Open this week. So we're really focused on delivering for eBay and trying to support our merchants, listening to our community, building tools that they want, and building data tools that are, contributing to them on a daily basis, but providing value and insight around how to best succeed on the platform. That's core to us as a business.
Paul O'Connor, Head of Services at Optiseller, thanks very much for joining us. I hope to speak to you again on another podcast perhaps, and thanks indeed for listening in. Please do stay in touch if you want to find any more about Optiseller or about global e-commerce experts. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for your time, Riki. I appreciate it.
E-commerce expansion myths blasted. Successful cross-border expansion help. Listen to the show to hear how one UK company is helping e-commerce sellers successfully expand into Europe and double their profits. Hosted by Andy Hooper of Global E-commerce Experts.